This is the Aftermarket Radio Network. Hey everybody, Carm Capriato, Remarkable Results Radio, and another Town Hall Academy. We're in the 400 episode zone. Been doing this for many, many years. Thank you so much for your loyal support and for being here to listen to some of the most incredible discussions that we have in this singular topic forum that we've been doing for so many years here in the industry. We appreciate that. Listen, conference season pretty much ends with Apex, and by the time this episode goes out, Apex will have been over. But then what happens is January starts an incredible array of programs and events and conferences for the spring or late winter spring of 2025. We're going to a bunch of them. And so please keep your ear to the ground and listen, because we'll be announcing them soon. We'll be doing keynotes and moderating panels and stuff. So really happy about that. Hey, we got some great sponsors. Some high fives to them. NAPA Tracks will move your shop into the SMS fast lane with on-site training and 6 days a week support and local representation. Find NAPA Tracks on the web at napatracs.com. AutoFix Auto Shop Coaching will help your shop go from surviving to thriving, from financial insights to operational excellence. Make your shop into a well-oiled machine. Talk to Coach Chris, autoshopcoaching.com. And are you ready to optimize training with today's class? In just 5 minutes daily, boost knowledge, retention, and improve team performance. Start seeing results today. Believe it or not, Tracy and I are on today's class, and we're having a blast working with it. Join your peers at todaysclass.com. We're talking regrets. I am so excited about this topic. It kind of goes back to some of the topics that we've covered in the past, like grief, and a lot of the stuff that Dr. David does with me. By the way, Dr. David Weiman, Weiman Consulting, leadership consulting firm, Philadelphia, PA, and 9+ episodes so far.
It sounded like a lot until you told me how many Murray had done.
Oh, 20+, Murray?
You told me to count earlier. I didn't realize that. That's amazing.
20+, Murray, but I've known you for many, many, many years, Murray.
Yes. Well, here's the thing, Carm. You and I are so busy, the only time we ever get to visit is when we do a podcast.
That's right. I guess when I miss you, I have to do a show.
Right? That's pretty much what happens. So,
Murray Voth, RPM Training at rpmtraining.net. Good to have you here, Murray. Set up this whole regret episode for us.
So the way this started, you and I were talking about why more shop owners don't take shop management training or sign up for 20 groups or coaching. You know, the camp group, we've talked about that for years. All of us coaches talk about how do we get more of them. Part of that, one of those conversations, we were talking about my classes that I teach. And in every single class, I have 1 or 2 people that say, I would have known this 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, depending on how long they've been in business, how old they are, right? And we were talking about how difficult it is to get somebody who's never taken this training to come to a website like mine or Chris Cotton's or, you know, all of us guys, we all talk to each other, right? And go, I want that, I need that. But they always just see the cost of it and they don't realize the impact it will have on their lives, right? Until they take it. And they're all of a sudden like, oh my goodness, look at my gross profit dollars I can improve. Look at this and look at that. But then the conversation got a little dark. We then started talking about shop owners who say that comment, I wish I would have known this, let's say 10 years ago. And we talked about a few shop owners from my past and my early years of coaching who did the math on the money they had left on the table. And one guy calculated $1 million in his business career to that point based on what he learned in one of my first classes. Now, it's one thing to do that exercise and to go, oh, look, I can make $1 million more in the next 5 years looking forward. But he got so hung up on it that he actually quit the training and the coaching. And he's one of maybe 3 people in my career of almost 20 years of coaching that could not let go of that feeling of failure, of regret, of that whole piece, that powerful feeling of not being able to look forward. And I want everybody to know listening that I've made a couple of mistakes recently in the last month that are going to cost me a little bit of money, not tons, but enough. And I am working through regret this week myself, David. So I don't know what your fees are, but maybe you can help me too. I am solving the problem. I have dealt with a supplier. It's a supplier issue and a billing issue that I didn't catch. and we are talking, and it's going to be fine, right? But for the first sort of 3 or 4 days, I was beating myself up for not having caught this sooner. Anyway, so that's the setting of it. This gentleman who figured out he had left $1 million on the table and could not move forward from that. And that's how the conversation started.
Did he share why that led to him dropping out?
It took some time to sort of suss that out. I think he came a couple more times. We had these things called performance groups that he joined, and then he would sort of leave, and then he would stop bringing. We do our numbers analysis. We have a composite, and then he would stop bringing the numbers. And so I sort of would talk to him, off to the side, and at a break or something, and ask him some questions. And he could never really verbalize it in those words. I'm not coming because I regret that. It wasn't that clear. But where it was cemented is where he stopped coming. And about 6 or 8 months later, his sons, talking about taking over the shop, they began to attend the meetings. And they then said, Dad won't let go. He won't let go of his old crap. He won't let go of his old tools. The shop was a mess. He won't clean up the parts room. And he won't let go of what identified that. So the boys actually confirmed that. And from the last time, this is back a long time now, let's say even 10 years ago, last time I know, the boys completely left the business, and I don't even know if that business exists.
Again, I'm an innocent bystander here. I have a question. Did his regret hold him? It held him back, obviously.
That was my perception. I mean, on the outside of this conversation, yes.
And that's what we need to talk about. If you feel regret on anything, saying you're sorry to an individual who lost someone in their life or a bad business decision, there's a way, I believe, we need to talk about this. How do you get up and over it?
To get up and over it, you have to identify what the root cause of it is to make sure you're getting over the right thing. I do wonder, and Murray would have insight into this, what I think may have happened is he previously thought of himself as a competent decision maker. When he started to add up the pattern, it may have changed his fundamental view of how competent a decision maker he is. And he may have thought, well, if I'm this broken, what could fix me? I don't know if he was expressing it that way. And part of what we're talking about is this, there's sort of the conscious and the unconscious biases that we have.
Mm-hmm.
But something suddenly became conscious to him, like, holy crap, what have I been doing this whole time? $1 million was left on the table. Maybe I'm just not good at this. I think that something fundamentally may have changed about his view of himself.
I agree with you, David. I think that's very helpful. But I also think, and again, you can probably remind me of some of these biases that we as humans have. But, Daniel Kahneman's written a lot about human beings and decision-making with money, right? Economics. I think part of it is, my perception is he was relatively successful. I mean, if he'd been in business for 10 years, that meant he'd survived, right? He statistically had made it. So number one, he had made it to 10 years, which most shops don't, right? When they start. It sounded like they had raised the kids, he bought a home, he paid off his mortgage, so he was relatively middle-class Canadian guy, business person that had, why beat yourself up for that? But I think for him in particular, and I forget the terminology, David, and maybe you'll remember it is, but there are people who, when it comes to money in particular, there's that sunk cost fallacy, right? Where I just keep putting money into something because I'm going to get my money out. There's other fallacies like that that Kahneman talks about. Yeah. So part of it is I left $1 million on the table, and he saw this $1 million back there, and his brain could not let go of that $1 million, even though it was water under the bridge. So to me, in that specific situation, I think that was more where that was going. But if you don't mind, guys, let me just throw 2 more things in here. Is back to the subconscious part, David, is what happens if he comes from a family of origin where shame and guilt or blame are used? And so then at this point, he's identified something he didn't know, something he in his mind is bad. And so now he's blaming himself rather than blame others or shame. Oh, there's the shame and guilt, right? So there's another kind of 20 episodes here.
Yeah. And you might think of it as a cocktail of things. There's no one explanation for it because all these things are interacting. You're reminding me also, this is how he attributed this. Someone who worked with him may have said, he's just sort of disorganized. And so he's not on top of things as much. You describe this sort of disorganized shop also. And I think the shop is almost like a Rorschach card for the person, right? I mean, I never saw someone who had a super tidy shop, but they, in their dress, were completely disorganized mess, with stuff out of their pocket. I never saw that. Either the shop was organized, they were squared away, or the shop was disorganized and they looked like they had just tumbled out of a dryer and whatever was on them is what they were. But I do think you're getting at something important and related to Carm's question, which is how we attribute success or failure in our lives can help determine what are we going to do about that. Because Murray did something interesting. He explained earlier the bridge between what went wrong and then what did I do about it. And so also feeling like our actions are paying off, there's a return on the investment of our time and activity really does matter. And if all that happens with the regret is that you sit with it, you feel cruddy because in your family, for whatever reason, you were raised thinking maybe you weren't going to make it anyway, and this is just a confirmation of that, or all kinds of other influences. I do think there are people who learn from regret in a way that where Murray was responding with, hey, I got this patched up with that supplier. We figured out what went wrong. Probably won't make that mistake again because of the memory of it. But I do think that attributional style, which is Martin Seligman, University of Penn professor's concept of like, that's what separates optimists from pessimists. And I think that has a lot to do with what Murray's talking about. I think I could be wrong.
One of my favorite.
I'm a big fan. I feel like our bookshelves probably have the same thing.
Oh my God, my goodness, Seligman. I mean, I got to tell you, Seligman's writing got me out of a very, very dark place when I was young, in my 30s. Yes, very, very much, very helpful. That gentleman was very helpful in my development of growth and working through my stuff.
I had a great friend who, over 10 years, I kept telling him that he needed to hire himself an expert management coach, an accountability partner. And he did 2 years ago. I go to a meeting with him each and every month, and I sit next to him, and he went to me, he says, I hired a coach. I've talked about this on the show before. I've hired a coach. Great. Who? He told me one of his buddies in the meeting. He joined that organization. And I said, so how do you feel about it? He goes, damn, you were right so much. All along, you were right. I am so happy. He had the attitude, and I guess this goes back to, he had regret. For sure he had regret, but he didn't let it stop him from moving forward and saying, I can pick up my butt that I've been dragging for the last so many years and do this. And I keep thinking about, is it an attitudinal fix that you have to get or find?
You know, David, I'm going to call on you. I'll give you a second to collect your thoughts with Seligman's optimist and pessimist. I'm also thinking of Carol Dweck's work on a fixed mindset and growth mindset. Could you review, David, for us? I'm putting you on the spot. There's sort of the three things that define a pessimist and an optimist. And then, because I think that's what helped me in my growth. And I think it'll help our listeners with that piece. So awesome.
It links back to Carm's question because you can learn how to think more optimistically. It's not this kind of pie in the sky, disconnected from reality. So when a bad thing happens to an optimist, they tend not to personalize it. So they don't necessarily blame themselves for it. They tend not to think it's generalized across everything in their lives. And they tend not to think that it's permanent. A pessimist, when a bad thing happens, very personal. I did this, generalizes across their lives. I screw everything up and it's permanent. It's always going to be this way. So if you think about the way they might react in a traffic jam, the optimist says, bad traffic today. I'll just go along with the other three areas. This will be over soon. It'll probably clear up. Then I'll be on my way. This just happened today. The pessimist could be in the car right next to the optimist, banging on the steering wheel. I always pick the wrong road. That's the permanence and personalizing it. I'm always stuck in lines. Is it the doctor's office or a supermarket? I always pick the wrong line to be in. Now I'm in the wrong lane. And so it's a characteristic way of looking at bad things and good things. So when good things happen to an optimist, they personalize it. I did the right thing here. I picked the right number in the lottery. It's totally random. I picked the right number. I'm lucky in general. I'm lucky at other things. I get great parking spots. I always get a great table in restaurants, and it's permanent. This is just something that always happens for me. The pessimist, when something good happens, and I'm reminded of the story, There Must Be a Pony, sums it up really well. If you've ever heard this story, but there's a family, they have twin sons who are 7 years old, and one's an eternal optimist and one's the eternal pessimist. And the father does an experiment. on Christmas morning in the optimist's room, there's piles and piles of horse manure. And in the pessimist room, there's piles and piles of gifts. The father, by the way, is a psychiatrist, which explains a lot about why he did this. And so on Christmas morning, Dad goes up the stairs and he opens the pessimist's door with all of these Christmas gifts and games and sporting equipment. And the kid's just eyeing all of these gifts suspiciously. He goes into the optimist room and the kid is shoveling this horse manure over his shoulder wildly. His father's super confused. He says, "Son, what are you doing?" And the son says, "Dad, with all this horse manure, there must be a pony." And that story for me has always summed up this difference so well.
Well, that is such a powerful short story.
Oh. Oh my goodness, you have just made my whole day, David.
I'm glad.
You're going to help your client get up and over stuff by seeing that story.
Yeah, in fact, I have a group meeting, as soon as we're done here, and I'm going to open up with a pile of manure. Before I forget, gentlemen, another one of my favorite people that I studied and read about was Deming, W.E. Deming.
Yeah.
Out of his writing, I created a phrase for myself, which I then work with my clients with, is to control the things that I can control so that I can deal with the things that I cannot control. Because what was happening was as a somewhat pessimistic person, I don't think I was too dark, but I had some issues there. I would take the blame for something that was out of my control. I would feel guilty or feel shame for something that was outside of my control. So for our listeners, let me give you a direct example of how I coach this, right? So September in parts of Canada can be a quieter month in business, right? It's back to school. It's a shoulder season. We're not getting ready for winter yet. And so some of my clients, I would say 2/3 of them had a dip in revenue in September, which can be, frustrating, challenging, can be discouraging. When we look at their numbers and at their composite, I always look at what they had control over. And so I look at their parts gross profit margin and I will say, look it, you just got your parts profit margin to 50% for the first time in your career with us. Look at your service gross profit margin. Look at your billed hours per technician per day. You guys did the absolute best with the number of cars that you had in place today. You worked with the controllables. The fact that the phones weren't ringing, yes, marketing does affect that. And so then getting that mindset of working on what you can control gives you, I think, the psychological strength or the intestinal fortitude, as our old friend Bob O'Connor used to talk about, to face things like the unknown. So, for example, people have survived some horrific things in parts of your country with the hurricanes and stuff like that, the floods in Spain. There are people who are feeling guilty about what happened, even though they had no control over it. If you closed up your house and you put up the shutters and you put up the plywood, you did what you could. But if you assumed that it was going to be fine and it broke windows, then you didn't do what you couldn't, right? So, David, I don't know if you could speak to a proper psychological terminology for what I just described.
Something that you're talking about that struck me, in addition to this focus on the things we can't control, is interesting psychologically, because shop owners, to me, and I've learned so much from the conversations with Harm about it and just my own observations. For whatever reason, I was always fascinated by shops. And the first car that I had, the shop owner was a former race car driver, and his shop looked like a race car driver's shop. I mean, this place was buttoned up as like a surgery suite. But what did I take away? Owners are problem solvers and owners are action oriented. When you're a problem solver, you naturally gravitate towards problems, even if they're unsolvable, and it's consuming. So a piece of what you're describing, at least for the shop owner, not necessarily a homeowner, is when shop owners as great problem solvers, it can be very attractive to try to figure something out that there isn't an immediate quick answer to. What I loved about what Murray said earlier, though, is when you have a thought partner, when you have a coach helping you like he is, you can point out the things that highly self-critical people will overlook. And so that self-criticism, that's a characteristic style that maybe drove them to where they are, right? If I feel like I was successful because I was hard on myself, what do I do now that I don't have a tendency to look at the wins, the things that I controlled? And if I have someone like Murray there to help me, they can go, hey, look over here. I know you're trying to beat yourself up on this side and the things that you couldn't control. But I think that thought partner piece is super important, because the owner is unlikely to get the whole team together and say, look at how I screwed up, everyone. So I think there's also this kind of, it's lonely at the top concept going on. Like, who else is the owner of the shop going to talk to? And so Carm sitting next to the guy who said, yeah, I finally got a coach. He can talk to Carm, or the owners who talk to Murray can talk to Murray. But if you're alone, that is a cruddy feeling because there's nobody helping you reframe what's going on or to help you with looking at, hey, but you did these 5 things that succeeded, because they're characteristically looking at the problems. They're characteristically beating themselves up.
Hey, let's face it. Your shop management system is the single most important tool in your shop, period. NAPA Trax has made selecting the right shop management system easy by offering the industry's best, most comprehensive SMS. Now, it all starts when a local representative meets with you to learn about your business and how you need to run it. After all, it's your shop, so it's your choice. And having local representation is a huge plus. Customizing Trax to your business, whether you're a one-person shop or a large multi-bay or multi-location company, a representative consults with you to help optimize your shop's workflow, efficiency, and profitability. Trax always has the flexibility to do business how you need to do it, which means it can also grow as your business grows. And unlike the other guys, we'll be there for you after installation with the best training and support in the business. Yes, a learning management system tailored to each role in your company. Simply put, Trax was designed and built for shop owners just like you. Visit us on the web at NAPA Trax, that's NAPATRACS.com. Auto shop owners, as we roll into a new year, it's time to reflect. How did 2023 treat your shop? If you're shaking your head or unsure, you're not alone. If last year left you wanting more, ask yourself, what's changing this year? If the path forward seems foggy, it's time to turn on the high beams with AutoFix Auto Shop Coaching. They have the map you need to navigate the road ahead. With targeted advice on operations, finances, and team building, AutoFix guides shops from uncertainty to undeniable success. Don't let another year pass you by. If you're ready for a change but don't know where to start, AutoFix is your next right turn. Visit autoshopcoaching.com today. Your journey to a better business begins here. Strengthen your shop's entire team with today's class. Everyone from technicians to service advisors can access impactful training on their phones in just 5 minutes a day. Opt for solo sessions or ignite friendly competition, challenging team members to climb the leaderboard for the highest score. Our effective daily training ensures measurable progress, helping you develop your team. Train smarter, not harder, with today's class and transform your shop and your people. Start seeing results today at todaysclass.com. What's going through my head right now is to stop and think about the clients that you have. Murray, if you were my coach and I had a tough thing or I'm observing stuff that's getting, I'm an eternal optimist, by the way, but you still have to be objective in everything. Something happens, I'll find a good way to say, I got in the right lane and all this good stuff happens. We worked our butt off, look at where our numbers are. Here's all the great reasons. But Murray, has anyone ever come to you as a client and said, hey, Murray, help me through this?
Yes, they have all the time.
Okay. To my point about moving on with regret and saying, hey, I may need a little help to get up over that mountain. And to me, not only as a coach in our industry, a consultant, an expert, I love to call you guys experts. You're constantly learning about stuff. We get to the point where we go over the next hurdle and the next hurdle and the next hurdle. And who helps us through it? Is it going to be the significant other? Is it going to be, one of the number twos in the business? Or is it going to be the person that I'm paying each and every month, not only to help me with my numbers and help me with my marketing and look at my HR and look at my KPIs, but there's this other slice of life working thing. I don't know what I want to call that. You go to the well, help my conscience, help my soul.
On that note, because I want to tie together something David said and what you just said is I do offer to help. I do have boundaries. I have a coach, by the way, Carm knows this, David. I have somebody named Brenda who is my executive coach, who is my, I loved your thought partner. I hadn't heard that term before. And she is the one that will sometimes tell me to give myself some space or point out the wins, where you always start our sessions with the wins, because I tend to always be moving to the next thing, which actually frustrates a few of my clients because they will succeed at something and I will look at them 6 seconds later and go, okay, so what's next? Because that's how I am with myself. So I sometimes have to back up. But if I could address this, Carm, so I have a contract's the wrong term, but a coaching agreement as soon as mental health issues develop, we do refer people to people like David. I mean, there's a limit. I do work very hard at my own boundaries with my clients. But I have to say something, Carm, is one of the most common positive pieces of feedback from our mastermind group members is, I love being part of something where other people have gone through what I'm going through. That piece that somebody else is feeling what you're feeling, somebody else has made the same mistake, somebody else is going through the same thing. That sense of being part of something is, I'm normal. People will show up to these mastermind groups totally nervous about showing numbers or totally nervous about whatever. And after their first meeting, they're like, oh my goodness, I feel so good about myself.
And think about how in life we're trained that finances are private. Through our whole life. You don't tell other people what you make. You don't, I mean, some people do, but we're not supposed to do that. So this permission to share that data is another piece of it, because now I'm in a community where I've shared something that previously may have been taboo to share. Also, something Murray said, I know this is going to sound like a mutual admiration society because I'm talking about all the great things Murray said, and he's doing the same with me, and I appreciate that. But he went to the data with the person. He didn't say, in the example that he gave of looking at that 50% number, he didn't say, cheer up. He said, look at this fact. Look at this fact here. This is data. And so the outcome could also be that in the memory of that experience, the person learns to start doing that themselves, which I think would be a great outcome. Like ultimately internalizing the voice of the coach, remembering that. Or if that person doesn't, Murray has it to anchor back to and say, hey, remember that time when you went through that really bad September, but then we looked at the numbers that are actually working well together, because that's another benefit of that relationship.
I am so excited where this is headed and where this is going. There's so much.
I'm wondering why you kept Murray and I apart all of these years.
I regret that I've done that.
If I had known there was a Murray out there, I would have said Mark.
Oh, my God.
Well, if I would have known that David is a psychologist in Pennsylvania and he's like in the same state that Seligman's from, oh, my goodness, like, wow.
I'm thinking in this whole regret zone that if I regret that I never terminated a toxic employee, and I should have done it 2 years ago, and finally the business got to a breaking point and I finally did it, and now I am in regret because of that, would that push me never to do it again if it ever happens? I remember how bad I felt. I was the right thing to do, but for me, it was a bad thing to do. It was either the employees or this person. Can you get up and over the regret of making really tough decisions? Or I guess it depends on being an optimist and a pessimist. I guess you got to really know who you are. And if not, you've got to go to your expert, your thought partner, and say, help me over this.
So I think that we can, but I think we do need help, every single one of us. I thought quite a large mistake, let's say 7-8 years ago. I'll elaborate just for a minute here. So I'm invited to speak to a group of shop owners who were looking at coming to our coaching company. I was with a different firm at the time, right? Not RPM. This goes back a few years. And I was pretty excited that, we were being approached to get this business because they were leaving who they were with. They weren't happy with who they were with. And the perception that I had from their sponsor, the warehouse that sponsored this, was that they were a very high level, high performance group of shops, right? That was the perception I got. So I went into the meeting at this high level, aggressive presentation. I'm a chameleon. I can adapt to a brand new person who's never been to this, or I can be whatever, right? Whatever you need. And I came in that way. And about halfway through the initial presentation, the president of the wholesale parts company took me aside at a break or something like that and said, maybe you should ask them more questions. And I was devastated because that's how I usually operate. That's my usually go-to is ask questions. Where are you coming from? What are your challenges? What are you facing? What do you see as opportunities, right? But I went in there thinking that I have to impress this high level of people with this high level knowledge and conversation. And guys, I finished the meeting. We did the stuff, whatever. I held it together. But I got in my rental car to drive off to whatever next session or the airport after that. And I was just embarrassed to my deepest core at that point. And I have to tell you guys, it took 2 days. But you know what actually got me over the hump was calling someone. At this point, unfortunately, it's been long enough that I don't actually remember who I verbalized that to. It could have been my lovely wife. It could have been a couple of my friends. It may have been another person I knew in that parts company. I don't know. but verbalized it and woke up one morning and that feeling of regret and that was gone. And I got to tell you, I never enter a meeting. I don't care how high level it is. I never enter a meeting anymore now without just going in and asking questions.
Before David replies, I want to tell you exactly. I would say to myself, because someone came in and said, I would say, I know better. I know better. And those things, when I'm corrected for something that I know I should have done and I was off track, that helps me get back on track.
That reframing is a big part of this. I'm reminded of Jocko Willink's comment in Extreme Ownership, where he talks about reacting to when something bad happens in the Navy SEAL program, where he led SEAL Team 6. He said, I would say good. And somebody brought me bad news because I have to figure out how to use that. And that's a very thin sliced or direct way of dealing with it, which doesn't leave out, but what if you're alone in a rental car driving back somewhere from an experience like that? I also think in the examples that you both gave, they're learning tools. And I think that if you can use the metaphor of a tool or a learning process, or if you discovered something while you were repairing a car that was a learning that you hadn't forgotten after that, this can be a similar thing. If I understand something about that part, or which part not to use, or which brand doesn't hold up or doesn't fit well, I don't forget that. I can remember that and use that in the future. So I think the regret has the opportunity to be a powerful learning tool. And I'm also reminded of the idea of the OODA loop, OODA, which was, I think, a Air Force Colonel John Boyd, who had this idea that it's a decision-making method. But first you observe, then you sort of orient, then you decide, and then you act. But it's called the OODA loop because then you take the results of the action and feed it back through the loop again with the new information. In the example of, well, I waited way too long to fire this person, I think that you can kind of go back through and document it and think, what did I do well in that situation, to pick up on something Murray had mentioned? What didn't I do well? But also, it is very easy to criticize ourselves after we have new knowledge that we let something go on too long. If you did it 7 times, then I'd say, hey, maybe Carm has a problem letting people go who aren't good for him. I think in the example that you gave, I probably regretted things I acted on too quickly in the past, more than things I waited on, because I tend, in the example that Carm gave, I get better at it. And I think, well, here are the things that I now realize. Stop with thinking about what happened, because I can't do anything about that. I would now screen for these things earlier. I do a lot of talent assessment. My firm is a leadership firm. We do talent assessment, coaching, and organizational development consulting. I might tweak the talent assessment piece to look at values more, or check references more about that specific thing, whatever that thing is that I would have let go on too long, and make that part of the assessment. So that's how I would use the OODA loop to go back and correct my assessment process, the questions that I ask. Recently, I added a question to one assessment that we were doing for a client. I said, knowing everything you have heard about the organization so far, how would you describe their ideal client? And how would you describe the client that is not ideal for them? And I only intended to use it in that one assessment for that company. I've now permanently included it because it was so revealing about the person's attitude about people. It wasn't an accident to include it in the first one. It was an accident that I included it after that. But I thought, oh, wow, I've learned a lot by asking that question. So it's a similar thing. I've been doing this for a while and I still learned something new. It wasn't regret. I could have said to myself, hey, dummy, why didn't you have that in all the assessments you've done for 25 years? But I do think you can take what Carm described and feed it back into the system, the process that you're using to assess people, to make it less likely that that would happen again.
Fix things before regrets grow.
It's an action.
So you have to be objective, observable. You cannot have a closed mind when it comes to having a regret. You can say, what can I learn from this? So you're having to be a perpetual student in your own leadership, in your own positive and negative things the decisions that you make. Murray, I'm here saying, I know better. Okay. Don't beat yourself up. Learn from it.
Exactly. Now, on that note, people have asked me over the years, what was my biggest regret in business. And then when I had a shop. So David, I was in the service station business for 25 years. And, a lot of people want to hone in on that. What's that one thing, right? Which is usually life is like that, but I will sort of acquiesce and I've thought about it. And I will say, of all the things, challenges, money lost in the early years, whatever, is not letting go of a toxic employee when I had the chance. And so now I bring that to my coaching practice. And so the way I bring that to my coaching practice, the same way a shop owner who then learns, and again, let me circle back to what you said, David, new knowledge that I didn't know. And some of us will regret that we didn't know that. We'll regret these consequences of not knowing it, and we have to work our way through that. But as a shop owner, when you go through that, you can then observe that in your own people. You can observe maybe nobody else, like maybe you have a manager that has the power to hire and fire, but maybe you have a technician who makes a mistake on a vehicle and is beating themselves up. You see a service advisor upsets a client, and then these are good employees. These are people who are trying, but they made a mistake, right? You can now observe what you learned in your own life, in your own person. You can pass that on to the team as their leader.
Really good point. And that alignment down through an organization is extremely important because everyone's watching everybody else. And if they see that there's somebody who's sort of an outlier in how they treat people or how they deal with things, or that there's one person who's made similar mistakes over and over again, but they're still employed there. So what does that mean about my work? Like maybe I shouldn't try so hard if make mistakes isn't such a big deal. But I think you're getting at how do we create a culture around this so that everybody's aligned with it?
Yeah, that's very, very powerful. When people talk about culture, and it's kind of a buzzword, and I get a little irritated with buzzwords, even though I participate in them. But this whole culture thing in our world of automotive has really been a thing. But to me, I think, David, you just gave us black and white definition of how to improve culture, right? Is consistency, watching people, like that idea of, other people are making mistakes and they get away with it and I don't. And so maybe I should not work so hard. What you just described there is culture, giving people the tools of what to observe and how to interact with their people so that they can create this culture that everybody's on. And I used a better term than this, but everybody's on board. Everybody's facing the same way.
I'm stuck on something you said earlier, which is people asking you what your biggest regret was. I feel like that's like saying, what was the worst funeral you ever went to? Because It causes you to go to a pretty dark place in your mind. I know we can't do this, but I would love if, in addition to giving that answer, we could say, well, also, let me tell you what my biggest learning is from all of this experience, because that's potentially more valuable. I think we can turn regret into that same kind of OODA loop cycle, because we know that shop owners generally are action oriented. So what actions would we do differently now that we know this new data? There's always going to be new data like that. The other thing that I'm reminded of, and I think Carm and I may have talked about this in a prior conversation, prior podcast, was the idea that, and this is something a professor of mine said in graduate school. I realize I'm quoting 6,000 people today. I'm going to start quoting Murray and Carm, but that activity is the antidote to anxiety. And because shop owners are so action-oriented, and I'm assuming this from my own experience, that we can reframe this as, well, what activity would be the antidote to the regret? Like, what are some things you could do? And I'm phrasing that in a very deliberate way. What things can you do? Because if you didn't have a wrench, how would you get this part off? Oh, well, I'd modify this other thing. Like, I just think that's how mechanical problem solvers think is, well, what if I didn't have that? I knew a service technician who worked in the health arena, and he worked in healthcare, worked in hospitals, and he had a CAT scan machine that he was trying to fix, and he didn't have a bracket in his truck that was the replacement part, and the FDA has to approve the parts that you use in these medical equipment. And he said, I went to Home Depot and I found a bracket off the shelf that was like something you would use in carpentry, that if I bent it and cut a part of it off, it would fit in this machine and get it running again. And he said, I did it because I didn't have the approved part, but I made this work. When a CAT scan machine is down in a hospital, it's like if your computer analyzer is down in a shop, you can't do anything. And so that's why I would orient people to what are the things that you could do in the future, things being plural, if this happened again. Like, so I don't know if I'm making it.
You're making total sense, because when I work with shop owners, when they're stressed, like you talked about, activity is the antidote to anxiety. I mean, that is just, you just described 98% of shop owners. When things are going poorly, whether that's an HR issue, whether it's revenue, cash flow, whatever, the first thing they do is take a vehicle in a bay and work on it.
Wow.
Because it doesn't talk back, generally. I mean, if it's got rusted bolts, it might a little bit, right? So I use the example of they replace the water pump. It's all shiny, it's new, it starts, it runs, it cools. And the dopamine hit, plus just the satisfaction of I control this, I fix something, gives them that, it takes the anxiety away, it gives them a sense of success, gives them a sense of that approach, right? The trouble is that's their default. And when we go to our defaults, it doesn't help solve the business. So what I try to help shop owners do, I do this in my own life with some skills that are not my natural skills that I have to make myself do, is find ways where I can transfer that ability into that part of my business. So in other words, could I sit down for an hour and go through a spreadsheet? Yes, it's uncomfortable the first couple of times. I don't like Excel that much, but maybe I'll take a quick class on it. And next thing you know, I will hear from them 6 or 8 months later going, Murray, I really have come to enjoy sitting in my office and going through those numbers. I can't believe that I did, but you taught me to diagnose it like I diagnose a car, right? So I teach them to look at their numbers like, gauges, right? So what's going on? What's the issues? Follow this trail. And on that note, very quickly, because they're activity oriented, we have a lot of people whose natural brain wiring and natural kinesthetic learning styles and the rest of it means that we have a ton of people with ADHD and dyslexia in our industry. Like we're talking high percentage. For them to sit still in an office drives them insane. Never mind about the anxiety piece, right? So what I have done with that type of personality is I have got them to sit still in their office for a half an hour once a week. And they'll say, well, what do I do? I said, you know what? Play poker. Don't gamble money, but play solitaire. 2 things are happening. You're sitting still, you're in an office, but the main thing that I'm teaching them is that they're busy so that their employees know that door is closed. For many of those people, they're so active, they're always on the floor with their people all the time, as opposed to up at the brig, watching the waves and watching the horizon, watching what's coming towards them, and learning how to be in that office. And eventually they gain the rest of the skills. My most activity-based person, he's actually drag races for fun on the side of having a shop. I met him, I hadn't seen him for a couple of years. He's not come back to coaching again. And he says, Murray, I spend at least an hour and a half a day in my office now, which started off as a half hour a week years ago. And that's a skill that you can learn and you can transfer from your other great skills that you have.
Awesome.
I am blown away that we had this incredible topic called regrets, and it has gone into a couple of wormholes that I absolutely love, from spending time and calming down and away from your comfort zone and knowing better, and activity is the antidote to anxiety. God, David, that is just, wow. Hello. And I think back to my biggest regrets. I'm an optimist. I'm an ideation guy. And yeah, I've got a few really big ones over all the years. But those little ones, I always say, how can I fix them? I think an optimist looks at those as opportunities. But a couple of big ones, I'm up and over them long time ago. And there's a lot of people that can't get up and over them. And to your point, Murray, where the guy didn't come back to coaching and he knew he left $1 million on the table, so why should I ever do anything about it again? Well, to me, my idea would be, okay, let's do 2. And maybe that's the power and the value of this episode, is that we talked about 1 million great things. Thank you so much for being here, guys. There's so much here to unpack. You may have to go back and listen to this 2 or even 3 times, or share it with a spouse, share it with your people. Anyone who's going through this, even on a personal basis, there may be a gem here in the discussion that may help you to regret less. Final thoughts, Murray Voth, then David.
Well, it's just been a real privilege to be in this session with you, Carmen, with you, David. And I would just like to say this was amazing. And David, hope I can get to know you better. That's my final comments.
My final thought is, how many times Murray described something that was troubling and he laughed right away? That's an important attitude to have. To be able to laugh at ourselves, to be able to laugh at a situation where, aside from just, if you're watching the video version of this, you'd see Murray smile. It puts us in a different mindset. I'd rather be happy at work dealing with cruddy stuff than unhappy. And like the kid shoveling wildly through the horse manure and laughing, there must be a pony. That attitude is so important, but also laughter kind of discharges anxiety too. How many times have you laughed and then felt horrible? Like probably never in life. Like we usually laugh and we feel pretty good.
Yeah.
And that kind of typifies so many conversations I've had with Carm where we were laughing about something. Carm, thank you so much. My final thought is it's been how grateful I am that I've had the opportunity to know Carm and now Murray. Really feel quite grateful about that.
Well, David, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And we're having David back again to do some really neat new stuff on neuroscience, neuromarketing. Thank you both. Dr. David Weiman, Weiman Consulting, a leadership consulting firm, Philadelphia, PA, and Murray Voth from RPM Training, rpmtraining.net. Thanks, guys. This is great. Appreciate it.
Thanks for being on board to listen and learn from the premier automotive aftermarket podcast. Until next time.